What's up, everyone? Jason here from INDYCAR Ministry, and welcome to our very first ever experiment. You see, we have come to realize that drivers have plenty of places to share about their cars, what's happening on the track, what's going on in the championship. But we wanted to create a space for people involved in racing, whether it's drivers, team owners, crews, whatever, wives, to share their faith journey. And so was having a conversation with Stingray last year about this. And so we decided to pilot this opportunity to do just that, to share our faith journeys. Now, our very first victim, our very first guest is Stingray Robb. He is the latest to join the NTT Data INDYCAR grid. He was last year's Indy Lights runner-up, 2020 Indy Pro Championship winner, but even more so, a Christ follower and just an incredible human being. Stingray, man, welcome. Thanks for jumping in and doing this together. Man, you're just a week over a week away from your first IndyCar race. Man, how you doing? How you feeling? What's the season like for you?
It's good. Yeah, it's well, first off, thanks for doing this. I'm excited about this. I think it's something that is going to be fun and good and important for us to share. So I'm excited. But going into the first race, it's kind of all new to me. I mean, as a rookie going into IndyCar, it's I'm wondering what it's going to look like. But at the same time, I'm still pinching myself every morning, trying to figure out, is this real? Am I just dreaming? What's happening? But that's so cool to feel. It's just a realization of my 5-year-old dream, And so I think that, this off season was a bit challenging, and it was a long off season, but I'm glad to be where we're at. We're with a really good team, and I think that going into St. Pete, we're in a good spot.
Yeah, you're in the 51 car, which has been carried. It's a lot of famous guys have been in that car. It's an opportunity, and your deal kind of came together a bit late, but you were out there just in time for Thermal Club, and yeah, it was. It's really awesome to see this opportunity come alive for you. I got to say, I've had the privilege just being in racing my whole life and knowing hundreds, if not thousands of drivers. I do want to share just a quick story about Stingray, and I don't know that I've ever shared this with you personally, so I get to do that now. But, many drivers kind of come and go as part of our sport, right? We recognize that. But there's a few that make a mark in your life. And I got to say, Stingray, you've definitely done that for me. I don't know. I'm sure you remember, obviously, 2020, you won the Indy Pro Championship. Yeah. And 2020 was a chaos year for racing anyway, but we finished the year out at St. Pete and had the banquet in the Mahaffey Theater. Now, most, some drivers that know Jesus or acknowledge God in their lives will thank God or thank Jesus. You didn't do that. You did a lot more than that. In fact, you turned that Mahaffey Theater into a church. You shared multiple scriptures. It was incredible to witness. And honestly, it kind of teared me up to see, knowing that a majority of that room is pretty resistant to the gospel of Jesus. It was powerful. And so thank you for doing that. I love how outgoing you are in your faith. And so what I really want to know is, man, where did that begin? I want to hear about your story. Like, where'd you grow up? Are you it's what, Idaho?
Yeah.
Where did your faith journey begin? All of that.
Yeah. Well, that's good. Like you said, that banquet, my speech that I gave there, I think that was God inspired too, because I am not a writer, or at least that good of one. And I remember I sat down and I wrote that 8-minute speech in about 10 minutes. So it didn't need any revisions. It just was what it was, and was exactly what it needed to be. And I don't know if you saw, but I was bawling my eyes out at that point. Even before I got on the stage, I was like, oh, I don't even know how to start. My goal was to make it through at least half, and then I can start crying. And it was like, no, I was crying before I even got to the stage, but it was great. So good memories there. But yeah, so I'm a small town kid, grew up in Idaho. I graduated from a high school our graduating class was less than 100. But growing up in a small town, I got to spend a lot of time with family, and my family was a big impact on my life. So both my mom and my dad were going to church at the time when I was born. And I grew up in the Nazarene church, and my grandparents actually were a big role in this as well. They went to a school in Idaho. It was called Greenleaf Friends Academy. and it's middle of nowhere, super small school, but it's a Quaker school essentially. And so their faith, I think, impacted a lot of my family. And I think that a lot of us kind of leaned on them in different times. And so I got to see what it's like to have that lived out, to be involved in a church, to be involved in a community and making a difference, and supporting people that maybe are not always open to asking for it, et cetera, et cetera. So they were a big impact on my testimony. And also I was homeschooled. And that's not to say I was homeschooled by my mom. I was actually homeschooled by a lady from our church. And so from pre-K through 7th grade, I would go to this lady's house and she would teach me. And her faith was so, how do you say it, contagious, that I think that it just inspired me to go on that journey as well. And it was never a shove down my throat, this is what you should think, this is what you should expect. It was like, okay, what do you think about this? What do you want to know about this? And they kind of let me learn as I went. And I was very blessed to be in an opportunity in a home that allowed me to do that, because I don't think a lot of kids my age got to experience that freedom to learn and understand. And I mean, in the same way, they were guiding me with, good principles and wisdom all along the way that was God inspired. And, I think that my homeschool teacher probably was the biggest source of my faith, because, every day we were doing Bible studies, and I think in that 2020 championship speech, I talked about James 1. James 1 is one of my favorite verses, and that's what got me through that season. And that was a book that I memorized the whole book of James at one point at homeschool. And so she would make me memorize it, record it on video, and then post it to a website that was like just private to us. But it was just like, this is what she wanted me to do so that I was prepared to go out in the world and share my faith. I remember pre-K and kindergarten, we would sing songs of like the 10 Commandments or whatever else. And so she just was instilling in us, something that was very valuable and important in our lives from a young age. And then also, going to public school after that, I kind of got to see the changes in views and exposed me to the world a little bit. And obviously, I grew up go-karting and traveling the world there. So I got to see what it was like outside of my little bubble. Yeah. And I think that helped me grow again, because I realized like how important it was to have what I had, that faith. And I think because of that foundation, it just translated into everything else. I think God allowed me to have my passions of racing and to experience those highs and lows, and then use my faith to get through each one. I think that we talked about that 2020 season before, and how it was the beginning of the year, and it was kind of my make it or break it season. And in the first race, I went out for qualifying, and there was a mechanical failure, and we didn't get to qualify. So I started last in the first race, finished 5th, fought my way through the field, finished 5th. Next race, started 5th, finished 2nd. Like, okay, we're still in this. We're not like completely out of it. And then we go to Mid-Ohio. And at Mid-Ohio, I think I qualified like top 4. I mean, it was pretty good qualifying. And then I finished 10th in race 1. And it was like no one's fault but my own. Like, I just drove terrible. Like, I ran off the road twice. I spun out, and it's like, man, who is this guy driving the car? Like, he's terrible. And I got out of the car, went back to the trailer. My driver coach was there, and he didn't have anything to say. He just shrugged his shoulders and walked by me. And I was like, all right, I need to go take a minute. Just go away. And so I put my helmet in the trailer, and I went for a walk out in the trees there at Mid-Ohio, and I took a knee. And I was like, all right, God, like, I've given everything that I've got to give for as long as I can remember. And I'm either not good enough, I make mistakes, someone else makes a mistake, there's a mechanical failure, I get run off the track. It's like nothing ever aligns to when I'm supposed to be doing what I want to be doing. And it was in that moment that James 1 verse came back to me, of the consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. And I realized that all those things that I had been through had been preparing me for something much more than I could ever imagine. Mm-hmm. And it was because I was faithful through it all, or maybe not the most faithful, but God was with me. He was faithful through it all, that I was able to get the best out of it and to be who I needed to be later on because of all those trials and tribulations, as well as the highs. I think that racing, as well as any other sport, it provides the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. and it's how you handle both that makes you great. And my faith allowed me to learn how to be the best person possible through each one of those situations.
Yeah, it's amazing how it levels you, right? When you are in those lows, that there's always Jesus, like with his hand reaching out to pick you up. And there's a level of humility as well that we start thinking a little highly of ourselves. Humility is around the corner for sure. And so that's man, that's amazing. And what I love, is I think that's my prayer as a dad for my son, both my boys, is that somebody would come alongside us as parents to impact their faith. And so I love that your homeschool teacher had that level of impact in your faith, and at a time when you were highly impressionable, sowed those seeds of faith in your life. I don't know the full story of Billy Graham. I know that a friend of his led him to Jesus. And then, of course, you all know how Billy Graham just impacted millions and millions of people. His impact's still going today. And so it's just phenomenal how God does that through people's lives, and just a reminder of who's around us, who has God put in your life to make a difference in. And so that is awesome. Yeah. And it's you would memorize the book of James of all books. I love James. I don't like James sometimes, but I like it.
It's convicting. It's definitely a convicting book. And I think that's why she did it. She's like, okay, this is going to be a challenging one for him. And I remember I would sit in class, right? It was her living room or her kitchen, wherever we were for the day. And she'd be like, okay, do you understand what this means? And I was like, no, not a clue. And she goes, okay, what do you think it means? I'm like, I don't know. And she'd make me sit there until I was able to creatively think on what the word meant. And it was so impactful because it also taught me a level of understanding, right? Like just reading the words and everything was not enough, but it was, how does this impact you? What is it telling you to do? What do you need to think and put into your mind to live out, or how is your worldview changing with this verse? And so doing those little things, having those moments of her like forcing me to think through it and not just read it and get by and check the box was so important. And I think that's why it impacted me so much, because I had already developed the myelin in my brain to fire off that memory, so that when I got into the real world and got into that situation, I was able to just go back to my toolbox of verses, and it's so good too. I'm reading Pilgrim's Progress right now. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's an old book.
I read it.
It's so good so far. And it's actually funny because my aunt and my uncle, they teach a college age Sunday school class, and they've been reading it in their group, and they started it right at the beginning of when I announced that I was going to INDYCAR. And their prayer for me has always been that I would be a light to the world in some way or another, I think, and that I would represent Christ in a way that's worthy. And I think that everyone in my family realized that going to this new stage of life, that I'm going to be challenged in ways that I haven't been challenged before, because my platform is growing. And I think that we all see it, right? Like when good things are happening, you get challenged a lot more. Yeah. And so we started reading Pilgrim's Progress. I was like, this is really good. And we started talking about it. And so they just gave me the book, like, Stingray, read this. And in it, I'm not all the way done yet, but there's different people along Christian's journey as the main character. And they are all just pouring into his life little by little by little through the Holy Spirit. And I think that's what our walk in faith is like, right? Like there's always challenging times, and when it looks like we can't get through it or whatever else, there might be someone there that God's using to speak into our lives. And so it's so cool that I've had so many instances like that where people around me have done that for me.
Yeah. And God will put things just at the right time, that you need to hear. And, it's funny you mentioned that, because that is the thing. As your influence does grow, we all know, what's the old saying, like dogs don't chase parked cars. When you're growing in your faith, you can always expect the adversary to be right there. But then again, it's like when you have James 1, like impressed on your heart, it's amazing. Just doesn't mean trials aren't going to come your way. You've got the tools to battle those and to face those. And so I love that. And so I got to ask, like, okay, you already said you feel like 5-year-old stingrays pinching yourself right now. I saw you post the other day, you reposted IndyCar's 100 days out from the Indianapolis 500. Like, you're 100 days from walking down the front straightaway at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to jump in a car. Like, I can't imagine. That was my dream, growing up. That was everything I worked hard for. It wasn't in the cards for my life, and I came to peace with that years ago. But how, I got to know, like, just keeping that at the forefront, like, how has that particularly impacted your faith journey in this season of just seeing God bring something like this to fruition?
Yeah, that is an interesting question. Because it's hard to balance, my idea of racing, right? I want to be able to have the idea that it is my passion, something that I love to do, and that I'm super thankful for it, but I don't want to make it an idol of my life. I want my identity to be apart from that.
Yeah.
And that's always something that I'm fighting with, I think, in some way or another, because it is something that I really, really love to do and enjoy. And it's been a pursuit for the last 16 years of my life, right? Like, from the time that I could remember, it's been a part of who I am. And so I think that going into that 100 days of Indy, it was a realization of, okay, God, like, you have been so faithful through all of this. And I think it was a reminder more than it was anything else of, like, what's to come and what he's done. Like, he's already gotten you this far, so he's going to take you the rest of the way. And that's not to say, like, even if he doesn't, it's going to be great either way.
Yeah.
And so I think that, I'm able to enjoy it that much more because I don't have to worry about the little things as much. I think that God's got it all in his control, and it just allows me to look in anticipation and hope of what's to come. And I think that Indy 500, it's a box that, like you said, I think any driver would want to check.
Oh, yeah.
And I can't wait. I'm super excited, and I hope that I enjoy it to its fullest.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the, I think that's, honestly, if we're honest, I know that was one of the challenges I faced, and I didn't have Jesus centered in my life when I raced. So much of racing wasn't idol for me. It was my identity. It's who I was. And then when that was taken away, I was lost and destructive, and it was a challenging season. But I love that you brought that out in the forefront. And so what are some ways that you are kind of protecting, like, keeping that in check? I can't imagine, you are in a place that you've dreamed of your whole life. And so how do you keep that in check, of keeping that from being an idol, keeping that from being your identity?
Yeah. So I have a life coach, as you know, Jason. We've talked about this a little bit. And one of the things we worked through last year was part of this, right? Was what is my identity? What really matters? And I got to the point during the season last year in 2022 where I hadn't had a win, but I'd had quite a few podiums. And we were going to Laguna Seca, the finale of the year. And it's like, man, I need a win. Like, I just need a win. Like, I can't think about anything else. Like, I've done everything right. I just need a win. Like, what in the world is happening? And he told me, he's like, Stingray, you don't need anything. Like, just trust God and, like, just give it up. He's just like, you're fine. Don't worry about it. Keep doing what you're doing. We're going to work on everything around this. We're going to control all the variables, all the variables that you can control. And then everything else will just happen as God intends.
Yeah.
I was like, it was like the worst thing I wanted to hear, right? It was like,
of course,
no, I don't want to listen to that. That's ridiculous.
Right. I need you to tell me you're right, Stingray. Get out there and win. Like,
yeah, exactly. Like, just put your boots on and lace them up tight and get to work, and that's not what he told me. But it was great because, like, I had to sit down with myself and be like, okay, you're fine. Like, just trust God with whatever it may be. And, like, I had this idea in my head of, if I don't win, I don't get to do this. And if I don't do that, I don't get to do this. If I don't do that, I don't get to do this. There's just this chain reaction. And he was like, dude, chill out. Just trust what God's going to do. And I love the verse that says, it's in Proverbs, and it says something like, man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it was. It's like, okay, just know where your identity stands. And I think that all the time, I'm looking around me, at different people in their realms of the world, of like, how do they stay humble? How do they stay committed to the Lord in different aspects of their life? And um, I think that because of all the trials and tribulations, I realized that um, my faith is super important, and that racing cannot be an idol of my life, because as soon as I put all of my hope and faith in that, my world will come crumbling down. And it's not to say like I have a faith because I know what the alternative is. It's like having a faith is worth so much more,
Yeah.
you know? And I think that's kind of the hard line, because I think a lot of people, they hear that and they're like, you just have a faith because you don't want the alternative. And it's like, no, that's not the case. Like, I just know that this is what I want. This is the joy that it gives me, the peace that I get. It's worth so much more. And I want to keep pursuing that, and it gives me a hope.
Yeah, it's life, right? Like I mean, at the end of the day, life, who knows what life is going to throw at you, but again, when you have the hope of Jesus in your life, it doesn't mean things are always going to go great and awesome and well, but you have this foundation. Jesus shared the parable about building your house on the rock, and no matter what comes, man, he's got you through all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one thing that's always kind of mattered or helped me in those seasons of, and just the reminder that you're created for more, is
Yeah.
Ephesians 2:10. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works. Like, whether that's in a race car, whether that's serving a milkshake at McDonald's, it doesn't matter. Like, God's created us for purpose, and that purpose is to be kingdom bearers wherever we are,
Yeah.
however big our platform is. It's just like, I don't know that your Sunday school teacher, sowing those seeds each and every day, had any idea what God was going to do in your life. She was just being faithful with what was in front of her. Same for those that impacted my life. And, that's the beauty of faith and how it goes.
Absolutely.
So just knowing the racing culture, I think that's one thing I try to share with people is, I look at Chuck and I as chaplains with INDYCAR and the USF Pro and Indy Next. We liken it to a country. And this country, it's like its own people group. They have their own culture, their own language, their own values. Racing in itself is like, every weekend you've got a couple thousand people that travel from place to place. It's the traveling circus. But it's a country that I would liken. I wouldn't say they're hostile to the gospel, like a place like Afghanistan or Iraq or something like that. But I would say the racing culture is a bit resistant to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so knowing that, like, what's it like for you living out your faith in the racing community? Like, what are some of the challenges you face? What are some of the ways you've seen God kind of move and impact other people with it?
Yeah. I think you're spot on with saying that they're resentful of it. They're a little stiff-necked, if you will.
Yes.
And it's kind of interesting, because I think it is large in part to the multinational influences that come in, right? They just think, oh, you're just an American, right? That's just what you're supposed to believe. You've been brainwashed in your own country of doing this. And it's like, well, look at the American next to me, and they don't think the way that I think. So it's always kind of interesting that people think that way. But I think that the hardest thing for me as a driver is, how do I share my faith in a way that's genuine and not just shoving it down their throat? Because I think so often, as teammates with drivers, you only get so much time around, and your focus is getting the car to go fast, etc. And so we're all there achieving the same goals, or striving for the same goals. But at the same time, there's always that thing in the back of my head of like, man, I really want you to know something. Like, I want you to see what I can see. And it's not for my own sake, it's for their sake. I just know that it adds so much value. And I've had conversations with teammates where they're challenging me, and I don't know if their goal is to break me down, but it is challenging, right? Like, they want to be right, right? They want to be right just as much as I want to be right. And so I think that the hardest thing in racing is to live it out as best as you can, because it's a very competitive sport, and it's super hard to keep your temper in check at times, or represent your faith in a way that it's not just okay, but it's pointing people, I want my actions not to just be like, okay, it's lukewarm, right? I want it to be hot in a certain direction so that people are like, wow, like when he did that, when he said that, that's what moved me to believe in what he's saying. And it's hard to take advantage of those opportunities in a way that's real and genuine. And so for me, that's probably the hardest part. I want to live it out, but at the same time, I'm focused on the racing and I'm super competitive.
And you're human, right? Like
Yeah.
you've got just a solid foundation. And I think it's like anything, when you put pressure on it, when things aren't going well, when things are at mid Ohio and things just seem like they're not clicking, how you respond in those moments makes such a difference. But it's it's like James said, consider it pure joy. That's when people are watching. And so, but it's tough. That's one of the things that I appreciate, as I started out about you, just how outgoing you are in your faith. And I know it's not an easy environment to be outgoing in. And so, but man, it's needed for sure. And so the hot seat, I got one more question for you. And I didn't prep you on this. I didn't ask you ahead of time. And so right now in this season, what is something that God is challenging you on or growing you in as we talk? Like what's a scripture that is just God's using, or what's going on in your spiritual life right now?
Yeah. This is good. I think it's something that I think we can all work on a little bit, but going through Pilgrim's Progress, and then also I go to Traders Point here in Indianapolis as well. They've been going through a series on Philippians, and one of the things that it just seems to be a key theme through it all that I think that God is reminding me of is action. Take action, and the Pilgrim's Progress, it talks about a character named Talkative, right? And Talkative is like, I want to talk to you about anything that's edifying or anything that is going to draw you closer to Christ. And like, these are all important things, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, yeah, that's so great. But Christian, who's the main character, he remembers Talkative from his hometown. And he's like, yeah, I know Talkative. I know what he's all about. He sounds great, but he doesn't live it out. And in Philippians, it also, going through the sermon series, it talks about like how we're citizens of heaven, right? And that should affect how we live our life and how we feel in our life. Our joy should be so apparent to other people that it drives them closer to Christ. And that's been something that I think about quite a bit lately, just because I feel like a lot of times I can say the words and do all the things, but until people see it, they're not going to believe it. Like we've just said, and I think that it's challenging because I don't always know what the best way to go is, but I think that I'm learning that it's not just the best way to go. It's just go, like, just take action as soon as you can, and God will sort out the steps. I think the racer in me is like, what is the best way to do something, right? What is the most competitive best way to do something? And it's not always that. It's like, I want you to take action and then we'll take care of the rest. Instead of ready, aim, fire, it's ready, fire, aim. And so I'm learning what that is in my life. I want to get better at that, and I want to use my platform as best as I can. But I think that that's just been a common theme lately for me, amongst other things, but that's been the main one.
I love it, man. And I mean, it's hard to leave the results up to him, and wherever things lay is where they lay. But man, that is powerful, man. Well, I can't thank you enough for jumping in and having this chat. And one last question, just of course, going into this season, and it can be racing related, it can be personal related, whatever. How can we pray for you in this season?
I think praying for wisdom off the track on how to handle things. I'm stepping into a new world a little bit. Like we said, I might be under some more challenges than normal, which I'm okay with. But I want to take action in things, and I want to be able to make a difference in those around me. I want to steward the gifts I've been given really well. So just prayer for wisdom in that, as well as performance on track. I want to be the best driver I can be. I want to win rookie of the year. I want to be competitive. So those are all things I think that can point people to Christ. Through our successes, it can represent our faith. But that's not our identity. So I want prayer for all of that. That would all be true.
Okay. Awesome. We can certainly do that again, man. I appreciate you jumping in this experiment. And so, hey, for those of you watching, make sure you click the link to subscribe, that you like, you share. Help us further this community of what God is doing in the IndyCar, Indy Next, USF Pro world. Certainly always appreciate your prayers. And so, hey, thank you so much for chiming in, being with us. We'll look forward to seeing you again when we launch our next episode of whatever this experiment looks like. And so, hey, have a great day, y'all.